cry aloud, spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet.
Alright, shalom, shalom, shalom. First thing and foremost, I want to give all praises, all honor, and all glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakradash. Secondly, I want to give double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who taught me this truth in righteousness and in sincerity. And third of all, I want to give salutations to the hopeful elect that's out on the highways and byways teaching and preaching this word in truth and in sincerity. And I don't really have a specific topic for this lesson. I'm going to just kind of go in through the spirit, but it's going to be centered around prophecy and how these words are true and living and how they were spoken to us in order to speak to the sheep of Yahweh Shai, so that his sheep, which is his people that will hear these words and believe in these words, believing in him, so that they can follow him and be delivered through their obedience and ultimately their election, them being chosen to believe and be saved. So this is the book of 2nd Esdras Chapter 2 and verse 15. This is going to be brief through the spirit. I'm going to probably come back in another part to this lesson because I'm on break. It reads in verse 1, chapter 15, Behold, speak thou in the ears of my people the words of prophecy, which I will put in thy mouth, saith the Lord. Right, so these words were put in our mouth by our power, Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai, and we were commanded to speak these words that were put in our mouth to Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai's people, to the people of the Lord. So when it comes to being, of the Lord, being a man of God or a woman of God, the main thing that you have to be is a follower of your God, of Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai. So that means the Lord's people that we were commanded to speak to are the people who will hear these words and believe and obey, because that's how you become of someone. You can't be let's say, you can't be a professional race car driver if you don't know how to drive a car. You ain't never practiced driving a car. You don't know how to start the car. You don't know how to make the car drive and make the car stop. There's no way that you can be a professional race car driver, so you are not of those professional people. So it's the same thing with the truth. If you hear these words, and eventually, even if it ain't instantly, but eventually if you don't begin to believe and see this truth and call on those names, eventually it's going to be fully manifest that you are not a person of God. So we were commanded to speak to those people who are of God, who believe in these words. That's the point of what I was saying. And it says, which I will put in thy mouth, saith the Lord. So these words that we're speaking are not our own words. The scriptures tell us that. And, they were given to us to speak. So it says in verse 2, and cause them to be written in paper, for they are faithful and true. So that's showing you that these scriptures were not just written through the heart and the mind of man. Man didn't just decide, hey, let me document these events that happened in the past, just randomly deciding to pull out, and pen and start, documenting what was going on. No, they were given spiritual inspiration to document everything that they documented, and everything that was documented specifically was supposed to be documented for a reason. It all serves a purpose. It says in verse 3, fear not the imaginations against thee. Let not the incredulity of them trouble thee that speak against thee. Right, and it says, fear not the imaginations, because you got all of these people that are in their own imagination. You got people that imagine that they can be, that the God of the Buddhists can save them. You got people that imagine that Jesus Christ, which is showed to be a so-called white man with blue eyes and blonde hair. People imagine that God is real and that God can save them. That worshiping that God, going to the Christian church, and paying the pastor to rob them of their soul. They believe that they imagine these things will save them and help them to prosper. And these imaginations are against us, because our truth, is that Yahweh B'Ashem Yahushai is the only true and living power, and that you only get salvation or help or harm from him. All things come from him. So those imaginations that they're having are against us. That's one of the imaginations that we're not to fear, because the scriptures tell us that all those who rise against us and all the doctrines, the gods that rise against us will be brought down, and they will be confounded and showed to be a lie. So it says, let it not trouble thee. Fear not the imaginations against thee. Let not the incredulity of them trouble thee. Right, and that's kind of going into the disagreeing, the harsh disagreement, because they come up against us and try to tell us that we are in a cult, or that we are antichrist, which is idiotic to say. They try to say that we are extremists, we are, a hate group, or they try to use the T word, we are a danger to society, or we are racist, the anti word. They like to use these things and say them against us. But it says, let not the incredulity of them trouble thee. So let it not trouble thee. It says that speak against thee, because their words are against us. They're speaking words that are opposed to us, opposed to eternal life. People speak against that. Opposed to getting with a woman when she reaches the flower of her age, which is hitting puberty. When she starts to get her period, so to speak. That is biblically when she is legal to be, taken in and married, which is you having sex with her and, having her as your wife. That's what the scriptures tell us is legal. But you got people that speak against that. You got people that speak against the so-called white man, the so-called Arabic man, the so-called Chinese man. You got people that speak against the truth that they were created to be slaves, to serve in slavery to the children of Israel, who will rule righteously. So they speak against that as well. But that is the truth. So the scripture says, let it not trouble you when they speak against you. Because the scriptures tell us their words are going to be flipped on them. And their own words is going to tell them that they were lying and that they were false. Because the truth of Yahweh B'Ashem Yahushai is going to be ever present. There's not going to be any overlooking it or, acting like it's not here. Because the truth is going to take over the entire earth, the entire universe. It says in verse 4, for all the unfaithful shall die in their unfaithfulness, right? So these unfaithful people, that are following these false gods, these false gods are not going to be able to save them when Yahweh B'Ashem Yahushai begins to put belt to ass, so to speak, when he begins to whoop them, when he begins to beat them black and blue, beat them like they stole something. Because ultimately, these Israelites who were given the law, given the service of God, they have continuously did the opposite. They choose not to serve Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai, but instead to serve their own belly, to do what they want to do. But it says in verse 5, "Behold, saith the Lord Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai, I will bring plagues upon the world, the sword, famine, death, and destruction." Right, and that sword is going into any form of weapons used to kill. It can be your hand, it can be a pistol, it can be a knife, it can be a literal medieval sword, it can be a brick, it could be a stone. So people are going to be using the sword. That is going to be a plague that is going to be sent and let loose in America, which is spiritually Egypt and Babylon the Great. So people are going to use their weapons, and they are going to use them to kill, to steal, and to destroy. It says famine, so a lack of bread, a lack of water, a lack of light, famines of light, power outages, famine of bread, food being short, no new food stocks coming in, the water stopping, from running. There's going to be famines like these. The famine of the word being the ultimate famine, when the preaching of this truth is going to stop and the men of the Lord are going to hide themselves. That is going to be the ultimate famine that is also going to be brought. It says death, because people are going to be starving. People are going to be killing themselves. People are going to be killing each other, to steal what they have, to consume their flesh, because there's not going to be any food out here. So cannibals are going to be created, and existing cannibals are going to be running rampant. Spiritual death. These people are going to be, killed spiritually, in all different manners, because there's going to be all different manners of spiritual afflictions. You're going to have different left-handed angels, death angels manifesting like demons and terrifying these people. So it's going to get very bad out here, And at the end of the day, that is the prophecy that was spoken beforehand, which I am reading. It says in destruction of whole households. And I'm speaking of the man and his seed, the man, his wife, and his children. That's a household. So whole households, whole family lines are going to be judged. They're going to be destroyed. They're going to be starved out. They're going to fight each other. It says just overall the destruction of these idols, because their gods are going to be nothing. Once all hell breaks loose, once Jacob trouble comes, their idols, Jesus Christ, Buddha, all of these, Mecca, the stone, all of these different idols, false gods that these people worship, they're going to be destroyed. The false hope that these people had in them is going to be destroyed. That false image that they were controlling something, that God could, save them or bring harm for them or to them. All of those false lies are going to be destroyed. So that's part of that destruction, that plague of destruction that's going to be coming. It says in verse 6, "For wickedness hath exceedingly polluted the whole earth, and their hurtful works are fulfilled." Right. So because iniquity has abounded, because iniquity has not been uprooted like a poisonous tree, pulled out from the roots so that it can't come back, because that hasn't happened in America, but sin and wickedness and just, abominable ideologies and false gods have been allowed to stay and grow here, because that has happened. And it says, and their hurtful works are fulfilled. Because, right, and that's going into the wickedness of this place growing to its maximum capacity, growing to be basically a fully grown tree. So America is growing fully in its wickedness. And when it gets to the point where it is completely grown, which we are close to, when it is grown to its 100% perfection, that is when it is going to be cut down and burned with fire. It says, therefore, saith the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, I will hold my tongue no more touching their wickedness, which they profanely commit. Right, because they boldly and proudly commit this wickedness, walking around, parading themselves. And I'm speaking of these Israelites mainly, because we were the ones given the law. So we are the ones who are judged for breaking the law. You got Jake walking around, parading themselves in all red, wearing dresses and skirts, walking around with red umbrellas. You got the pride parades. You got our people out there, soaking in their filth and in their delusion. You got people identifying as a animal, a cat or a dog. You got people out here doing all manners of wickedness. You got people out here literally eating their own feces, allowing dogs to perform sexual acts on them, or performing sexual acts on dogs, or just different animals. These are wicked acts that are profanely committed. So it says, I will hold my tongue no more as touching their wickedness, which they profanely commit. Right, boldly and proudly serving other gods, saying, I'm not going to serve you, I'm going to serve them because they're better. That's what our people do when it comes to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. So he's not going to hold his tongue anymore, and he's going to instead judge them. He's going to reward them with the punishment that they asked for. So it says, neither will I suffer them in those things which they wickedly exercise themselves. Behold, the innocent and righteous blood crieth unto me, and the souls of the just complain continually. Right. The brothers that then passed on into the spiritual world, they are still crying out. And, even Jake that has been put to death here. Because you got a lot of Israelites here that have been unjustly killed, because Esau, his judgment isn't just. He judges with deceit, and he's an unbalanced ruler, and ultimately a biased ruler, and he judges his judgments outside of the favor of Israel. So he oppresses them when it comes to his judgments, locking Jacob, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, for things that they didn't do. Putting Israelites to death, you so-called blacks and Native Americans and Hispanics, just because, they are in a situation where they done pulled you over and they got the gun pointed at you. And, a lot of them is carnal, so they done grown accustomed to looking at your skin color and not liking you because what you look like. So you got them out here discriminating like that. There's many different ways that they unjustly spill our blood, so we are crying out to them. It says, the innocent and righteous blood crieth out to me, and we are crying out right now. And we are ultimately the innocent, we be the elect, because the blood of Yahweh Shai is covering us. So we will be found innocent, without spot and blemish in the day that Yahweh Shai comes, because he is going to cover us. It says, and therefore saith the Lord Yahweh, in verse 9 it says, and therefore saith the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, I will surely avenge them and receive unto me all the innocent blood from among them. Right. And that's in salvation. The dead in Hamashiach shall rise first. So the dead that were following so-called Jesus Christ, and to the best of their ability walking in that righteous path, they are going to be risen from the dead into that so-called UFO, which is the chariot, first before even the saints, the righteous Israelites being the elect. They are going to be risen before those men that are on the earth, which are their fellow elect members of Israel. The ones that passed away, they are going to be risen first, and then the rest of Israel that are of the elect to be saved, they are going to be delivered by being taken into that same UFO with Yahushua and the rest of the elect that passed away, before the deliverance. So it says, and therefore saith the Lord, I will surely avenge them, because we are going to be given those new bodies. We are going to be given perfect power and strength, and a perfect mindset to never do wrong that will offend our power. So we will never be brought low again. And we are going to be given the power to oppress our oppressors. Those who did unjust things to us, we are going to be given the power and the okay to get our revenge in the name of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. So we are going to be avenged through the Lord, allowing us to avenge ourselves, using his will and his power, through his will, using his power, but it says, well, actually, I'll close it off there, and Lord willing, I'll be able to come back in a part 2. So hopefully I was able to bring this out clearly, and until next time, Shalom.